YouTube, welcome back to another video. We are going to talk about fueling your body correctly to help maximize performance when we are thinking about in the gym, running, or any other endurance events that you may be training for. So it's a common question I'm asked in terms of the nutrition side. You know, if you're training for a marathon, chances are you're probably going to have to run a lot. If you're training for a triathlon, you're probably going to have to swim, bike, and run a lot. Whereas with the nutrition, there's a little bit more to it, and obviously a little bit more. People have a few more questions surrounding the topic. So, first of all, we want to switch the mindset. It's something I had to do. Squeaky chair. We're seeing food as fuel as opposed to sort of calories in to help build muscle or calories in limited to help drop body fat. So having that mindset of trying to be in a surplus or a deficit, because when I was in that approach and it was very much aesthetics and trying to drop body fat, build muscle, I very much focused on sort of if it fits your macros. You know, if I've got 3,000 calories, 180 grams of protein, 400 grams of carbohydrates and 50 grams of fat, for example, I would enjoy whatever foods I could when they fit into that. I still kept things clean, but, you know, I was eating lots of like cereal, maybe more processed food than normal. I'm not really prioritizing micronutrients or meal timing, which both of those are very important, especially the latter. If you're training for certain events, meal timing is going to be really important. But ever since I've changed to a more endurance-based program or an endurance-based goal, I've now switched that sort of thought process and see food now as much as fuel and the way of allow me to progress as much as I can within my session. So main thoughts when it comes to breaking down your nutrition and sort of key considerations are protein with each meal, which is a standard. You know, we're looking for around about 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So if you're 80 kilos like myself, I try to aim for around about that 160 grams of protein. Nice and simple, and I'll just spread that across the day rather than, you know, trying to cram it all in 1 or 2 meals. Because if I know if I have 3 or 4 meals with 30 to 40 grams of protein in across the day, I'm going to hit my intake rather than trying to play catch up as the day goes by. Carbohydrates are prioritized pre and post workout, and carbohydrates tend to be in every meal that I have, even if it is sort of vegetables or fruits. That's something that I try and keep in the system, especially as I'm doing a lot of aerobic work, lots of running. I want to make sure that obviously glycogen levels are sort of replenished and good to go for my sessions as the week goes by. Fats that I include across the meals as well. So that might be olive oil that I cook with, might be avocados, nut butter, dark chocolate. Again, healthy fats, fantastic for obviously hormone and sort of overall health. 2-3 litres of water per day, pretty standard, especially as I'm sweating a lot. That's actually increased, like my water intake's a little bit more. These bottles are phenomenal. I'm in Spain, so I'm sweating a lot. I noticed that the days that I run, my thirst is very, very much through the roof, i.e. like today. So making sure to get as much water and fluids as on board. Electrolytes upon wake and post higher intensity training. So not necessarily interval training, but high intensity training. So like for today, I did a tempo run 12K, which consisted of 6K of working at threshold. So quite high intensity, made sure that loads of water when I come back. In fact, one of these went down, some electrolytes and a Powerade, just again for some sugars and some carbohydrates. No caffeine after 2 p.m. because that's going to have an effect on sleep, which is obviously then going to have an effect on our recovery, which is obviously not what we want, especially if we're training for performance. And micronutrients with each meal as well, trying to make each plate that I have as colourful as possible. Now, pre-gym nutrition, nice and simple. I will aim to consume around about 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates. This will depend per individual on their overall amount of calories that they have, but also their body weight. Okay, but 60 to 90 grams of carbs is roughly enough. And I would go through things like oats, bagel, sourdough, maybe rice. Nice and simple, and looking to have that with some form of protein, because again, we want to make sure protein throughout the day is consistent so we can hit that overall target come the end of the day itself. I would be looking to have this about 60 to 90 minutes before. Obviously, everyone's digestive system is going to be slightly different. Obviously, if you're having quite a large consumption of carbohydrates, you might want a little bit longer to let it digest. So for me, I like to give myself at least an hour and a half to fully digest the meal, be in the gym and sort of good to go. Some people can do an hour, but you find what works for you. And if you train before work, so say if you're a 6 a.m. gym goer, what I would be looking to do is the meal the night before, going for a high carbohydrate intake or buy some carbohydrates in that evening meal. Okay, the reason being is, although yes, you've been to sleep, that glycogen that you've consumed through carbohydrates is still in the system and it can still be used in your workout. So I would wake up, hydrate, maybe have some caffeine, go to the gym, you are good to go. Okay, so because you've biased your carbohydrates the meal the night before, they're in the system to be used as energy for that morning workout. Now, in terms of intra-workout, so during the workout itself in the gym, not essential, especially if you sort of nailed the pre-workout protocol and everything else, you should be pretty, bang on. You're probably only going to be in the gym 60 to 75 minutes. So do you need something intra-workout? For most people, probably not. However, you can look to utilize sort of an intra-workout drink to obviously just help with glycogen levels and maintain energy. So something like a cyclic dextrin or like an intra-workout fuel, just different brands will market it different names. 40 grams of carbohydrates, you can put this in your water bottle with a bit of squash, or sometimes they come flavored, and it's nice, easy carbohydrates to consume. I would recommend this for people who maybe struggle to hit carbohydrate intake across the day. This is an easy way of doing it because it's liquid calories. But also, if you're someone that maybe trains first thing in the morning and you want to make sure levels are topped up, you could then look to utilize this in your intra-workout session. Post-gym, nice and simple. We're going to want to consume protein again, carbohydrates as well. Keep fat intake a little bit lower, mainly prioritizing protein and carbohydrates. I'll be going with a protein source that is sort of like chicken, lean beef, lean meat, for example, or whey protein. Carbohydrates can again be dependent on sort of what you enjoy, what you like. But I'd be keeping it maybe pasta, sourdough, rice, that sort of stuff. Keeping it nice and easy, nice and digestible. And then in terms of the meal itself, I would actually be looking to have this meal 30 minutes post-session. There used to be the 20-minute anabolic window, and I used to believe this, where if I didn't consume protein within 20 minutes of my gym workout, I thought the workout was pointless. I thought the session was no point. I've lost all the gains. All my muscle mass is just going to go away. It's not true. However, you do ideally want to wait probably at least half an hour just to allow your heart rate from the session to drop back to roughly trying to get it down as close to resting as possible, but if not, near enough. Because then at least that way your body's going to be able to uptake the nutrients far better from a digestive perspective, as opposed to 5-10 minutes post-workout where heart rate's high, lots of blood going around the body, and it's then all of a sudden rushing to your digestive tract. So key consideration, but I'd be consuming that meal sort of 30 minutes post-workout. Now, in terms of the run, obviously the principles do remain the same, where we want to bias carbohydrates before our runs, but it might just slightly different depending on sort of the duration of the run and obviously the intensity of the run, because more often than not, a strength session is not going to be as intense as something like a run on the body and the central nervous system. If you think about full body strength training session where you're in the gym for an hour or so, yeah, it's going to be intense, but compare that to maybe like a 2-hour long run, you're probably going to want to think a little bit more in terms of your fueling protocols. So the food you consume and the amount is going to vary depending on the run itself. If it's a high intensity run, then you may need to think differently in terms of loading compared to an easier run, okay, all based upon the sessions and making it specific. So I would be focusing on hydration even more so with the running. So make sure your electrolytes and water intake is where it needs to be before you go out, because obviously you're going to be sweating a lot more. For a short run, you might only need something like 20 to 25 grams of sort of carbohydrate. So it might just be a banana, maybe a little bit of honey, something like that. You're probably not going to need to worry too much, because ultimately, that's more than enough to cover you for a 5K, where you're probably not going to be running any longer than half an hour, maybe even less. However, obviously, if you're running sort of 20 kilometers plus, maybe you're training for an Ironman or a half marathon, ultra marathon, then you are going to want to look at consuming a larger portion of carbohydrates before your run, because obviously our glycogen is going to be being used a lot throughout the duration of the running distance itself. So again, for that, you may look at 90 minutes before having a large consumption of whether it be like bagel, sourdough, oats, whatever sits on the stomach well for your runs. That's what I'd be looking to have, and just obviously taking into account about 20K run, I want to be well fueled. So maybe even more towards that 80, 90, 100 gram carbohydrate mark. So your intra run, okay, this could be crucial for those of you who are doing longer distances. I would personally go for anywhere from the 60 minutes of running or longer. You probably want to think about having a fueling strategy. Also, if you are looking at doing a race, whether it be a half marathon, a marathon, an ultra marathon, then you want to use your training sessions to get used to your fueling strategy. And I'll talk a little bit through that on the last point. But using gels or chews to help top up carbohydrates in the body. So you might have seen like people using gels. They're fantastic. They're going to produce probably around about 40 grams per gel of carbohydrates, which straight into the system. Again, we just want to train the body to digest these well. I will also be obviously looking to take on electrolytes during the run. Also, just to make sure, obviously, we're preventing cramping or dehydration. So if you are going on these long runs, get yourself like a little running bag, running vest. Put all of these in your bag, whether it be like a bottle of Lucozade, some electrolytes in a bottle, your gels. I would then keep in the pouches to the side so they're easy to grab. But yeah, just obviously get used to taking on fluids and everything else during your training. In terms of consumption, I'd be looking at maybe around the 10K mark, so around the hour mark, and then every 5K after is general rule of thumb. But again, it's going to depend on the person, the individual at task. The base fuel SIS ones that I would recommend in terms of gels, they're what I use for my Ironman and what I recommend to clients, and they sort of sit very well. 40 grams per of carbohydrates per gel, which means that you don't have to consume as many, because the normal SIS gels are around about 25 grams. So it's an extra 15 grams per sachet, which is obviously ideal. But you definitely, like I say, you want to use gels in your training so your stomach can get used to digesting them, because you do not want to be going into a race, never having a fueling strategy, start taking gels and your stomach playing you up, because that's happened to me. I ended up pooing myself on an ultra marathon, and that is not what you want, but it's a good story to tell. So post run, you're going to want to prioritize hydration as well as carbohydrates and some protein intake. It goes without saying, if you've been on a nice long run like I did today, you want to get loads of fluids on board. My post workout meal was what did I have? I had some eggs, I had some sourdough and a Gatorade, as well as this water. So plenty of carbohydrates, a little bit of protein, a little bit of fats, done the job, sits well on the stomach. So we want to make sure the body is well refueled, especially after a long period of exercise. And then for your longer runs, I like to use the 80% method, whereby you look to consume 80% of the calories that you burned. You look to consume those back and add them on top of what your baseline is. So as an example, to keep things nice and simple, if your baseline amount of calories, so calories in compared to out sort of matches, is 2,500 calories, you go out on a 12K run and you burn, or maybe even longer, or you burn 1,000 calories, I then look to consume 800 of those calories back and then add them on top of what your baseline is. So 2,500, you burn 1,000 calories, 80% is 800, you add that onto the 2,500, and we're at 3,300 for that day. Obviously, the next day, if it's just a gym session, then you would then go back to your baseline number of 2,500. Okay, so something to consider, especially if you're running 10 miles, 16K, 18, 20, 25, 30K. So there's a little recap in terms of sort of key principles when it comes to fueling for performance and making sure obviously you are progressing with your training. Obviously, we've spoken a little bit more about pre, intra, post workout, where to focus on. We want to make sure we are consuming those calories back from those higher expenditure running sessions, because ultimately, if not, you're going to be under recovered, under fueled for the following workouts, and your progress is just going to drop, which is not what we want. So hydration is obviously crucial, especially on those sessions where we're sweating or if we're in a warmer climate. You want to get used to the stomaching gels on the runs, because otherwise you're going to be in for a bit of a shock come race day. And anything over a half marathon distance, you are going to need gels for that run to get the most out of it. I've done a half marathon without gels. This was a while ago. I would recommend using gels for a half marathon, probably on the 10K mark, and then maybe like the 16, 17K mark as well, just to keep you topped up for the last little bit. But you want to get practice. Almost treat it as getting the training the stomach just as much as training the legs for the run. It's a lot more now than just sort of calories in, calories out. Obviously, that does play a part, but we want to focus on the quality of nutrition as much as the quantity. And trial and error. Find what works for you and what doesn't. If you notice that before your runs, if you train on a completely empty stomach, even though you had a carbohydrate meal the night before, you feel awful, then maybe wake up 15, 20 minutes earlier, get a banana and some honey down you or something like that, and see how you get on. A few dates, fantastic. Or if you notice that maybe having oats before a gym session, you feel lethargic, you feel a little bit tired and a little bit bloated, then swap that out and maybe go for some sourdough, banana, honey, or something else. Okay, try and error, find what works for you, because it's all going to be different. But there's a little bit more in terms of nutrition and for performance. Hopefully we enjoyed this video. You can learn a thing or two from it. If you did, make sure to give the video a like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.